The rain fell in sheets that April night in Derby City when Melissa Simmons disappeared. Her cherry-red Mustang convertible, a graduation gift from her parents, was last spotted leaving Churchill Downs just before midnight. At 22, she was a rising star at the University of Louisville, known for her infectious laugh and talent as an equestrian photographer. But somewhere between the racetrack and her apartment in the Highlands, Melissa and her car vanished into the Kentucky night, leaving only questions that would haunt Louisville for a decade. What happened in the darkness of that stormy night would remain shrouded in mystery until a determined detective refused to let the case grow cold, unraveling a secret that lived in plain sight for 10 long years. The spring racing season of 2009 was in full swing as Louisville prepared for its moment in the international spotlight. The city hummed with anticipation, streets lined with blooming dogwoods and magnolias, as Churchill Downs readied itself for the 135th Kentucky Derby. Among those caught up in the excitement was Melissa Simmons, a photojournalism student, whose stunning racing photographs had recently earned her an internship with the Louisville Courier-Journal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. On the evening of April 28, 2009, Melissa attended a pre-Derby charity gala at Churchill Downs. The historic track glowed with string lights. Women in cocktail dresses mingled with trainers and jockeys, all raising money for thoroughbred retirement. Friends later recalled Melissa moving confidently through the crowd in a navy blue dress, her camera never far from reach, strawberry blonde hair gleaming under the chandeliers. Sarah Parker, Melissa's roommate, remembered their last conversation. She was so excited about covering her first derby. She called me around 11:30, saying she got some amazing shots of the favorite for the race. She sounded happy, said she was heading home soon. At 11:45 p.m., security cameras captured Melissa walking to her car in the far corner of the parking lot. Rain had just begun to fall, the drops catching in the dim yellow glow of the floodlights. She pulled the collar of her jacket tight, protecting her camera bag as she hurried across the wet pavement. The footage shows her reaching her cherry-red Mustang, unlocking it, and sliding into the driver's seat. That was the last confirmed sighting of Melissa Simmons, alive. The storm intensified that night, rain pounding against windows throughout Louisville as thunder rolled across the Ohio River. The roads from Churchill Downs to the Highlands neighborhood twisted through patches of poor lighting and construction detours. In the downpour, visibility would have been severely limited. Security footage from businesses along the route showed a red Mustang passing at 11:52 p.m., wipers fighting against the deluge. More disturbing, the cameras also picked up a dark SUV following at a consistent distance, its headlights cutting through the rain just a few car lengths behind. No one noticed this detail in 2009. It would take years before someone connected these dots. When Melissa failed to return home, Sarah initially assumed her roommate had stayed with friends to wait out the storm. But when morning came and Melissa's bed remained untouched, concern quickly turned to panic. Sarah called Melissa's phone repeatedly, each ring going straight to voicemail. By 9 a.m., she contacted the Louisville Metro Police Department to report her friend missing. Officer James Reeves arrived at their apartment by 10 a.m., a veteran cop with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He took detailed notes as Sarah described Melissa's usual routes home, her friends, and her habits. When Sarah mentioned Melissa's internship at the Courier-Journal and her rising reputation as a racing photographer, Reeves looked up from his notepad. "This isn't typical behavior for her?" he asked. Sarah shook her head emphatically. "Never. She's reliable to a fault. And with Derby week starting, she wouldn't miss a single assignment." "Something's wrong." Reeves nodded gravely. By noon, Melissa's disappearance was officially registered. Her parents in Lexington were notified, and they immediately drove the hour west to Louisville, faces etched with worry. By evening, the first search teams were assembled, focusing on the route between Churchill Downs and the Highlands. The police developed three initial theories. First, Melissa might have had an accident. The storm that night had been severe, and the winding roads could be treacherous, even in good weather. Search teams combed ditches and ravines along possible routes home, looking for any sign of the red Mustang. Second, perhaps Melissa had left voluntarily. This theory gained little traction with those who knew her. Her mother, Catherine Simmons, dismissed it immediately. My daughter was living her dream, about to photograph her first derby. She wouldn't walk away from that. Not for anything. The third possibility, one that police were reluctant to voice aloud but quietly feared, was abduction. Louisville, despite its charm and community pride, had seen its share of violent crime. The thought that someone might have targeted the young photographer sent ripples of unease through the city. Within 48 hours, Melissa's disappearance dominated local news. Her photograph, smiling behind her camera at last year's Breeders' Cup, appeared on every channel. Posters bearing her image and details were plastered across storefronts, community boards, and campus buildings. The Courier-Journal ran a front-page story, their editorial staff personally involved in spreading awareness about their missing intern. The timing, just days before Derby, meant that Melissa's case received attention beyond local news. Sports networks covering Derby preparations mentioned the missing photographer, bringing national attention to her disappearance. For a brief moment, the spotlight, usually reserved for thoroughbreds and jockeys, illuminated the search for a young woman who had vanished into the Kentucky night. As days passed without leads, Catherine and Robert Simmons appeared on local television, pleading for information. Catherine, her voice breaking, held up her daughter's award-winning photograph of a horse crossing the finish line at dawn, mist rising from the track. "This is how my daughter sees the world. Moments of beauty and triumph. Please, if you know anything about where she is, help us bring her home." The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Students from the University of Louisville organized search parties, combing areas that police had already covered, hoping fresh eyes might spot something overlooked. Local businesses offered their security footage. The racing community, tight-knit and protective of their own, established a reward fund that quickly grew to $50,000 for information leading to Melissa's whereabouts. But despite the community's efforts, the first week yielded nothing substantial. No skid marks indicating an accident, no witnesses who had seen anything unusual that night, no activity on Melissa's credit cards or cell phone. It was as if she and her cherry-red Mustang had simply vanished from the face of the earth. The Derby came and went, the celebrations muted in parts of Louisville, as Melissa's empty seat in the press box served as a somber reminder of the ongoing mystery. Her camera, which should have been capturing the most exciting 2 minutes in sports, remained missing along with her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As weeks turned to months, the investigation hit one dead end after another. Detective Sandra Morris, assigned as lead investigator, refused to let the case grow cold. A methodical investigator with over 15 years of experience, Morris had a reputation for persistence that bordered on obsession when it came to missing persons. "Time is both the enemy and ally in these cases," she told her team. "People forget, evidence degrades, but sometimes secrets become harder to keep as years pass." Morris focused on establishing Melissa's timeline with precision. Security footage confirmed she left Churchill Downs at 11:45 p.m. A gas station camera on Eastern Parkway captured her Mustang passing at 11:52 p.m. After that, nothing. The 7-minute window provided the only concrete evidence of Melissa's movements that night. The dark SUV appeared in both videos, maintaining the same distance behind Melissa's car. Morris flagged this as significant, but with the grainy quality of 2009 security footage, identifying the vehicle's make or license plate proved impossible. Still, she noted it in her file, marking it with a red tab, a potential lead to revisit. Morris interviewed everyone connected to Melissa, friends, professors, colleagues at the newspaper, even the jockeys and trainers she had photographed. Most conversations yielded the same portrait: a talented, driven young woman with a bright future. No enemies, no concerning relationships, no reason anyone would wish her harm. One interview, however, stood out. Melissa's editor at the Courier-Journal mentioned that she had been working on a special portfolio beyond her regular assignments. She was secretive about it, he explained. Said it might be her breakthrough work, but wouldn't share details. I respected her process, figured she'd show me when ready. This revelation sparked new questions. What was Melissa working on? Could it have somehow led to her disappearance? Morris requested access to Melissa's desk at the newspaper and her university locker, hoping to find clues about this mystery project. Her desk contained the usual items: notebooks, lens cleaners, memory cards, but nothing hinting at a secret project. Her computer had been taken home the night she disappeared and was now missing along with her. The university locker was similarly uninformative, containing only textbooks and spare photography equipment. The investigation reached its first major setback when, after 6 months, the active search was scaled back. With no body, no crime scene, and no clear evidence of foul play beyond circumstantial concerns, resources were gradually redirected to new cases. This didn't deter Morris, who continued working Melissa's case during off hours and weekends, but the reduced official attention was a blow to the Simmons family. Catherine and Robert maintained a persistent presence in Louisville, renting an apartment to stay close to the investigation. They channeled their grief into action, establishing a foundation in Melissa's name that offered scholarships to photojournalism students and raised awareness about missing persons cases across Kentucky. As the first anniversary of Melissa's disappearance approached, Louisville media revisited the story. The coverage brought fresh tips, most leading nowhere, but keeping the case alive in public consciousness. The reward, now at $75,000, remained unclaimed. Morris arranged for new billboards featuring Melissa's photo to be placed around Louisville, focusing especially on areas near Churchill Downs. "Someone knows something," the detective told reporters. "Sometimes people need reminding that we haven't forgotten, and we won't stop looking." The years continued to pass. Derby seasons came and went, each one a painful reminder of Melissa's absence. Her classmates graduated, careers launched, lives moved forward, all while time stood still for the Simmons family, trapped in the limbo of not knowing. By 2014, 5 years after Melissa vanished, the case had gone cold in official terms, though Morris still kept the file on her desk, reviewing it regularly for anything overlooked. Technology had advanced significantly in those 5 years, offering new possibilities for evidence analysis. Morris successfully petitioned for a budget to re-examine the security footage using enhanced digital techniques. The grainy images from 2009, when processed with 2014 technology, revealed new details. The dark SUV following Melissa's Mustang appeared to be a black Cadillac Escalade, model year 2007-2009. More importantly, a partial license plate was now visible, the letters KY followed by what looked like RDC or RBC. This breakthrough, while modest, reignited momentum. Morris cross-referenced vehicle registrations in Jefferson County, looking for Escalades with matching partial plates. The list, while narrowed considerably, still included over 30 vehicles. Methodically, Morris began tracking down each owner, examining their connections to Churchill Downs, the racing industry, or Melissa herself. Most were quickly eliminated. Elderly couples, corporate vehicles, people with solid alibis for the night in question. One name, however, caught her attention: Victor Hargrove, a wealthy horse owner and racing enthusiast whose stable had produced several Derby contenders over the years. His Escalade's plate, KYRDC 427, matched the partial view from the enhanced footage. More intriguingly, Hargrove had been present at the charity gala the night Melissa disappeared. Morris dug deeper into Hargrove's background. On the surface, he was respected in Louisville's racing circles, a successful businessman who had transformed a modest inheritance into a fortune through real estate, development and strategic investments in thoroughbred racing. He sat on several charitable boards and was a major donor to the Kentucky Derby Museum. Beneath this polished exterior, Morris found troubling indications. Hargrove had been accused of harassment by 2 female employees at his company, though both cases were settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. In his divorce filings from 2007, his ex-wife had alleged controlling and intimidating behavior, claims that disappeared when the settlement was finalized. Most significantly, Morris discovered that Melissa had photographed Hargrove's horses multiple times in the months before her disappearance. She had been granted unusual access to his stables for training sessions not typically open to the press. According to colleagues at the Courier-Journal, Hargrove had specifically requested Melissa for these assignments, impressed by her previous work. The connection was circumstantial, but compelling enough for Morris to place Hargrove under closer scrutiny. She requested surveillance on his properties and activities, though limited resources meant this coverage was far from comprehensive. She also began interviewing people in Hargrove's circle, careful to avoid tipping him off to her interest. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former stable hand who had worked for Hargrove in 2009 contacted the tip line after seeing one of the renewed billboards about Melissa's case. The man, now living in Tennessee, had been bothered for years by something he had witnessed the day after Melissa disappeared. "I came in early that morning around 5 a.m., he told Morris during their interview. Mr. Hargrove was there already, which was unusual. He was cleaning out the trunk of his Escalade, scrubbing it down with bleach. When he saw me, he seemed startled, then quickly explained he'd transported a sick horse the night before and was disinfecting the space." The stable hand continued, "It struck me as odd. We had trailers for moving horses. No one would put a horse in an Escalade. But Mr. Hargrove was my boss, so I didn't question it." This testimony shifted the investigation dramatically. Morris now had a suspect with means, opportunity, and behavior consistent with covering up a crime. What she still lacked was physical evidence or a clear motive. The hunt for Melissa Simmons and her cherry-red Mustang had entered a new phase, one that would test the limits of police procedure and a detective's determination to bring justice to a family that had waited far too long for answers. With a promising lead pointing to Victor Hargrove, Detective Sandra Morris built her case methodically. The stable hand's testimony about Hargrove cleaning his Escalade with bleach at 5 a.m. was compelling but insufficient for a warrant. Morris needed more. She obtained records of Hargrove's cell phone activity from the night Melissa disappeared, revealing his phone had pinged towers along the same route as Melissa's last known path. This wasn't damning on its own. Hargrove lived in that direction, but it placed him in the right area at the right time. Morris also discovered Hargrove had cancelled a major business meeting the morning after Melissa's disappearance, claiming illness. His assistant reported he had sounded stressed and distracted during their brief call. Another employee noted Hargrove's unusual appearance when he returned to work 2 days later, a fresh scratch across his right cheek that he attributed to a stable accident. Despite these suspicious circumstances, Morris still lacked physical evidence linking Hargrove to Melissa or her Mustang. No body had been found, and without it, building a case strong enough for prosecution remained challenging. The detective knew she needed to find the car. If Melissa had been harmed in or near her vehicle, forensic evidence might have survived even years later. Morris revisited the geographical aspects of the case with fresh eyes. If Hargrove was responsible and had disposed of evidence, where would he have taken it? His properties included a large estate outside Louisville, several commercial developments, and a 200-acre horse farm in neighboring Oldham County. Each location offered potential hiding places. The horse farm drew Morris's particular attention. Sprawling and largely wooded, with several ponds and a network of private roads, it provided ample opportunity to conceal a vehicle. Moreover, It was just 30 minutes from where Melissa was last seen. In spring 2015, Morris secured a warrant to search the property, carefully limiting the scope to avoid legal challenges from Hargrove's powerful attorneys. The initial search focused on outbuildings, using cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains. For 3 days, teams methodically covered the accessible portions of the property, finding nothing conclusive. On the final day, as officers were preparing to leave, one of the dogs showed interest in an area near a small retention pond behind the main stable. The animal became increasingly agitated, circling and barking at the water's edge. Soil samples were taken, revealing traces of automotive fluids, oil, transmission fluid and antifreeze that had leached into the ground. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed a large metal object submerged in the murky pond. The search team, their hopes cautiously rising, prepared for a recovery operation. Heavy equipment was brought in, and as a crane slowly lifted its dripping burden from the water, the distinctive shape of a car emerged. Coated in mud and pond weeds, the vehicle was unrecognizable at first. But as water sluiced away, the unmistakable contours of a Ford Mustang became clear. The once cherry-red paint had faded and deteriorated after 6 years underwater, but there was no doubt they had found Melissa's car. The recovery scene turned solemn as officers realized the Mustang's trunk had been weighted down with concrete blocks, a clear indication of deliberate concealment. More disturbing was the discovery inside: Melissa's camera bag, containing her professional equipment and memory cards, along with her university backpack. Personal items remained in the glove compartment: a hairbrush, lipstick, and a parking pass for Churchill Downs. Most significantly, investigators found dried bloodstains on the passenger seat and door panel. Though degraded by years underwater, modern forensic techniques could still extract DNA profiles. Within days, the lab confirmed the blood matched Melissa Simmons. The Mustang itself told a story of violence. Analysis revealed impact damage to the passenger door, consistent with another vehicle striking it at moderate speed, possibly forcing Melissa off the road. The driver's side window was shattered, with glass fragments embedded in the seat, suggesting it had been broken from outside while Melissa was still in the car. This evidence transformed the investigation from a missing person case to a suspected homicide. The discovery sent shockwaves through Louisville. Local news stations broke into regular programming to report that Melissa Simmons's car had been found on Victor Hargrove's property. The prominent businessman and horse owner immediately released a statement through his attorneys, denying any knowledge of the Mustang's presence on his land and suggesting someone had placed it there to frame him. For Catherine and Robert Simmons, the discovery brought a complicated mix of emotions. The confirmation that their daughter had likely been murdered was devastating, yet finding her car represented the first real progress in years. "We've lived in this horrible limbo," Catherine told reporters, her voice steady despite her tears. "Not knowing if Melissa was alive somewhere, unable to contact us, or if she was gone. Now we at least have part of the answer, though it's the one we feared most." The discovery of the Mustang provided Detective Morris with enough evidence to obtain more comprehensive search warrants for all of Hargrove's properties and business records. Teams of investigators descended on his Louisville mansion, office buildings, and secondary residences. Computers were seized, financial records scrutinized, and employees interviewed. A crucial breakthrough came from Melissa's recovered camera equipment. Though the camera body and several memory cards had suffered water damage, specialists from the FBI's Digital Evidence Laboratory were able to recover images from one protected card. The photos, taken in the weeks before Melissa's disappearance, revealed the likely motive behind her murder. The recovered images showed horses at Hargrove's stables, but not the champion thoroughbreds he proudly displayed to the public. These photographs documented emaciated animals in filthy conditions, injectable medications consistent with illegal performance enhancers, and staff administering suspicious treatments. Most damning were images of a bay colt, that had reportedly died of natural causes weeks before the Derby, a horse that strongly resembled one of Hargrove's entries in the upcoming race, suggesting an illegal substitution scheme. In the racing world, such violations would mean not just disqualification, but criminal charges, financial ruin, and permanent banishment from the sport that defined Hargrove's social standing and much of his wealth. The photos provided the missing piece, a powerful motive for silencing a young photographer who had uncovered corruption at the highest levels of Kentucky racing. Morris theorized that Melissa had been using her legitimate assignments to gather evidence for an exposé. Hargrove, somehow discovering her real purpose, had followed her from the charity gala, forced her off the road, and confronted her. What began as intimidation had ended in murder. With the motive established and physical evidence mounting, prosecutors moved forward. In July 2015, Victor Hargrove was arrested and charged with the murder of Melissa Simmons. The racing community and Louisville society were stunned as the prominent figure was led away in handcuffs from his office, the scene captured by the same newspaper where Melissa had once worked. Hargrove maintained his innocence, hiring a team of the best criminal defense attorneys in Kentucky. His legal team immediately began attacking the investigation, filing motions to suppress evidence and questioning the chain of custody for items recovered from the pond. They suggested the entire case was a conspiracy by racing rivals or disgruntled employees who had planted evidence on his property. The legal battle that followed tested the resources of the prosecutor's office. Hargrove's defense team employed delay tactics and procedural challenges that stretched the pre-trial phase for months. Each motion required careful response. Each challenge demanded additional documentation and testimony. Throughout this period, Morris continued building her case. She tracked down former employees from Hargrove's stables who corroborated the unethical practices shown in Melissa's photographs. She established a timeline showing Hargrove had opportunities to dispose of the Mustang without witnesses. She documented his lavish spending on attorneys who had helped silence previous accusations from women. A critical witness emerged when Morris located Hargrove's former groundskeeper, who had left his employment shortly after Melissa's disappearance. The man revealed that Hargrove had instructed him to dig a deep pit near the retention pond, ostensibly for a construction project that never materialized. The timing aligned perfectly with Melissa's disappearance, and the location matched where the Mustang was found. Despite the mounting evidence, legal proceedings continued at a frustratingly slow pace. The Simmons family attended every hearing, their presence a quiet reminder of the human cost behind the legal arguments. Catherine, once reserved in public statements, became an outspoken advocate for victims' rights, frequently addressing the media about the importance of persistence in cold cases. "My daughter was silenced because she discovered the truth," she told reporters. "We will not be silenced in our pursuit of justice for her." As the case inched toward trial, another breakthrough occurred. Forensic technicians, continuing their meticulous examination of the Mustang, discovered a partial fingerprint preserved in blood on the underside of the passenger door handle, a location largely protected from the water. The print matched Victor Hargrove's right index finger. This evidence severely undermined Hargrove's claim that he had never been near Melissa's car. His defense team scrambled, eventually suggesting that perhaps he had once helped Melissa with her car at the racetrack, innocently touching the door handle. But the presence of his fingerprint in her blood created a damning narrative that would be difficult to explain to a jury. As the trial date approached, Hargrove's resolve began to crack. His public persona of confident innocence gave way to a haggard, anxious appearance at court appearances. His business associates distanced themselves, his invitations to social events disappeared, and the racing community that had once embraced him now treated him as a pariah. In January 2019, nearly 10 years after Melissa's disappearance, and facing overwhelming evidence, Victor Hargrove agreed to a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to second-degree murder, He would receive a sentence of 25 years with the possibility of parole after 20 years, avoiding the potential life sentence a trial might bring. As part of the agreement, Hargrove was required to provide a full confession and reveal the location of Melissa's remains. In a recorded statement, he admitted to following Melissa from Churchill Downs, forcing her off the road in a remote area and confronting her about the photographs. When she refused to surrender her camera and memory cards, the confrontation turned violent. "I never meant to kill her," Hargrove stated in his confession, voice devoid of emotion. "I just wanted the photos." But she wouldn't give them up. She said people needed to know what was happening to the horses. "I pushed her, she hit her head against the car. There was so much blood. I panicked." Following Hargrove's directions, police searched a wooded area near his horse farm, far from the pond where the Mustang had been found. There, beneath a decade of fallen leaves and undergrowth, they recovered Melissa's remains. Forensic examination confirmed her identity through dental records and revealed a severe skull fracture consistent with Hargrove's description of her death. The discovery brought a measure of closure to the Simmons family, allowing them to finally lay their daughter to rest after 10 years of uncertainty. Hundreds attended the funeral service, including many from the racing community who had known and admired Melissa's work. Her photographs, including those that had ultimately led to her death, were displayed in the church foyer, a testament to her talent and courage. At Hargrove's sentencing hearing in March 2019, Catherine Simmons addressed the court, her voice steady as she faced her daughter's killer for the first time. "For a decade, we have lived with an emptiness that nothing can fill," she said. "We've missed birthdays, holidays, and all the moments that make up a life." Melissa would be 32 now. She might have had a family of her own, a career filled with beautiful images that tell important stories. That future was stolen, not just from her, but from all who loved her and from a world that needed her voice. She continued, looking directly at Hargrove. "Your wealth and status made you believe you were untouchable, that my daughter's life was less valuable than your reputation. But Melissa proved you wrong. Even in death, her work exposed the truth. Her camera captured not just your cruelty to animals, but ultimately your soul." Judge Eleanor Martinez addressed Hargrove before delivering the agreed-upon sentence. "Mr. Hargrove, you held a position of prominence and trust in this community. You used that position to shield corruption and cruelty, and when discovered, you took a young woman's life to protect your secrets. The court sentences you to 25 years in state prison, but no punishment can truly address the magnitude of what you've taken from the Simmons family and from society." As Hargrove was led away in handcuffs, Detective Sandra Morris sat quietly in the back of the courtroom. For 10 years, Melissa's file had never left her desk, her promise to find justice never wavering despite the obstacles, dead ends, and institutional pressures to focus on newer cases. In the days following the sentencing, Louisville media celebrated the resolution of the case that had haunted the city for a decade. The Courier-Journal published a special edition featuring Melissa's photography, including the ethical violations she had documented at Hargrove's stables. The Kentucky Racing Commission launched a comprehensive investigation into illegal practices within the industry, citing Melissa's work as the catalyst for reform. The University of Louisville established the Melissa Simmons Memorial Scholarship for investigative photojournalism, ensuring her legacy would continue through future generations of visual storytellers, unafraid to expose difficult truths. Churchill Downs created a press photography award in her name, presented annually during Derby Week. For Detective Morris, the case represented both her greatest professional achievement and a profound personal journey. In an interview after the sentencing, she reflected on the decade-long investigation. "Cold cases are never truly cold as long as someone remembers," she said. Melissa was never forgotten, not by her family, not by this department, and not by Louisville. Technology advanced, witnesses found their courage, and evidence preserved beneath the water finally told its story. Justice may have been delayed, but it was not denied. The Simmons family transformed their pain into purpose, expanding their foundation's work to support families of missing persons throughout the region. They became advocates for improved forensic resources and training for rural police departments, ensuring that other families would not face the same systemic challenges they had encountered. Catherine Simmons published a book about her daughter's case and the decade-long search for answers. In the epilogue, she wrote, "Melissa once told me that photography is about capturing light in darkness, finding beauty in overlooked places, and telling stories that matter." In her too brief life, she did exactly that. In her death, she continued to speak truth to power. Some tried to silence her voice, but instead they amplified it across years and beyond boundaries they never imagined possible. The case of Melissa Simmons became a landmark in Kentucky law enforcement, taught in criminal justice programs as an example of persistence, technological advancement, and the value of never closing the book on unsolved cases. The cherry-red Mustang, recovered from its watery grave, was restored and placed in the Louisville Police Museum as a symbol of the department's commitment to pursuing justice, regardless of time passed or obstacles faced. On the 10th anniversary of finding Melissa's car, the breakthrough that ultimately led to solving the case, the Louisville Metro Police Department held a ceremony honoring the investigators, particularly Detective Morris, who had refused to let the case grow cold. Chief Michael Reynolds presented Morris with a commendation, praising her unwavering dedication. "This case reminds us why we wear the badge," Reynolds said. "Not every story has a perfect ending, but Detective Morris ensured that this story had the truth. In our profession, that's the greatest service we can provide to the victims, to their families, and to our community." As the ceremony concluded, Catherine Simmons embraced Morris. Two women connected by tragedy, but united in their determination to find answers. Outside the police headquarters, spring rain fell gently on Louisville, not the violent storm of that April night a decade earlier, but a softer shower that seemed to wash the city clean, allowing new growth to emerge from ground once soaked in secrets. In her office later that day, Morris placed Melissa's file in the closed cases cabinet for the first time. The young photographer's smile looked out from the cover photo, no longer a reminder of failure, but a symbol of perseverance rewarded. Louisville, the city that had mourned her loss for a decade, could finally say that Melissa Simmons had crossed her final finish line. Justice had been served in the Derby City. Morris ran her fingers over the embossed word "closed," now stamped on the file. Cold cases were never about the temperature of evidence, she thought, but about the warmth of memory, the refusal to forget those who deserved to be remembered. As long as someone cared enough to keep looking, no case was ever truly cold. The story of Melissa Simmons and the dedicated detective who refused to let her case grow cold rippled far beyond Louisville in the years following Victor Hargrove's conviction. What began as a local tragedy evolved into a catalyst for change in how cold cases are handled nationwide, with Detective Sandra Morris emerging as an unexpected advocate for reform. 6 months after Hargrove's sentencing, Morris was invited to speak at the National Conference for Cold Case Investigators in Atlanta. Standing before hundreds of detectives from across the country, she shared the methodical approach that had finally brought justice in the Simmons case. Her presentation focused not on dramatic breakthroughs, but on the unglamorous persistence that solved the decade-old mystery. "Cold cases aren't solved by eureka moments," Morris told the audience. "They're solved by refusing to accept that yesterday's limitations define today's possibilities. Every technological advancement, every new investigative technique offers us a chance to re-examine evidence with fresh eyes." Her words resonated with investigators facing their own seemingly impossible cases. Morris emphasized how advances in digital enhancement had transformed grainy 2009 footage into crucial evidence, how modern DNA extraction techniques had recovered genetic material from blood samples subjected to years underwater, and how geospatial analysis had helped narrow the search for Melissa's car. "The tools evolve, but our commitment cannot waver," she concluded. "Behind every cold case file is a family frozen in time, waiting for answers we promised to find." The response was overwhelming. Detectives approached Morris afterward, sharing details of their own stalled investigations and asking for insights. What began as casual conversations over coffee evolved into an informal network of investigators supporting each other's work on long-dormant cases. This network gradually formalized into the Persistent Justice Initiative, with Morris serving as its first director. The organization created protocols for periodic review of cold cases, facilitated sharing of resources between departments, and advocated for dedicated cold case funding at state and federal levels. Morris's growing national profile brought renewed attention to other unsolved cases in Louisville. The department, recognizing the public relations value of her success, established Kentucky's first dedicated cold case unit with Morris at the helm. The unit, initially staffed by just 3 investigators and an evidence technician, focused on reviewing cases where technological advances might yield new leads. Within its first year, the unit resolved 2 long-dormant murders dating back to the 1990s. Both cases involved DNA evidence preserved in evidence lockers, but never subjected to modern analysis techniques. Local media celebrated these successes, dubbing the team Morris's Miracle Workers for their ability to breathe life into cases long considered hopeless. For the Simmons family, watching their daughter's case inspire systemic change brought a measure of meaning to their loss. Catherine became a frequent speaker at the unit's fundraising events, sharing Melissa's story to illustrate why such work mattered. Robert, once the quieter presence in their advocacy, emerged as a technical advisor, helping the unit understand how advancements in digital photography could be applied to evidence analysis. On the 3rd anniversary of Hargrove's conviction, Catherine and Robert announced the expansion of their foundation's work to include funding for advanced forensic training for rural Kentucky police departments. The Melissa Simmons Foundation partnered with the University of Louisville to create workshops where officers from resource-limited communities could learn the latest evidence collection and preservation techniques. "My daughter's case went cold, partly because the technology to analyze certain evidence didn't exist in 2009, Catherine explained at the program's launch. But many cases go cold simply because departments lack access to existing technology or training. We can change that today." The Foundation's first workshop, focused on digital evidence recovery, drew officers from 28 counties. Many arrived skeptical, but left with transformed perspectives on cases they had reluctantly shelved years earlier. Within months, 2 departments reported breakthroughs in stalled investigations using techniques learned in the program. Morris attended each workshop, not as an instructor, but as a participant alongside the rural officers. Her willingness to continue learning, even after her celebrated success, set the tone for a culture that valued growth over ego. In quiet moments between sessions, she often shared details of the Simmons investigation that hadn't made headlines, the false leads, the bureaucratic obstacles, the moments of doubt when the case seemed truly unsolvable. "I want them to know this work isn't magical or heroic," she told Catherine after one such conversation. "It's stubbornness in the service of truth. Anyone can do it if they refuse to give up." As the cold case unit's reputation grew, so did its caseload. Families who had long ago resigned themselves to living without answers began reaching out, some with cases dating back decades. The limited staff couldn't possibly address them all, leading Morris to develop an innovative volunteer program that would again reshape how cold cases were approached. The civilian cold case review team recruited professionals with specialized expertise: retired doctors, engineers, accountants, computer scientists, and trained them to examine case files through the lens of their particular knowledge. These volunteers didn't conduct interviews or handle evidence, but offered fresh perspectives on information already collected. A retired civil engineer, reviewing a 1987 disappearance, noticed inconsistencies in soil descriptions from where a victim's car was found, suggesting the vehicle had been moved after the crime. An accountant examining financial records in a 1995 murder case identified a pattern of withdrawals, pointing to blackmail rather than the robbery motive originally suspected. A computer programmer created an algorithm to cross-reference seemingly unrelated cases, revealing connections investigators had missed. These civilian insights didn't solve cases outright, but often provided the new direction needed to reignite investigations. More importantly, the program engaged the community in the pursuit of justice, transforming cold cases from forgotten police files to shared civic responsibility. The national media took notice. A feature in the Washington Post profiled the Louisville Cold Case Unit as a model for departments nationwide. Time magazine included Morris in its Innovators issue, highlighting how her approach had democratized investigative work while maintaining professional standards. 60 Minutes sent a crew to film the civilian review team in action, capturing the moment when a retired chemistry teacher's observation about degraded evidence led to a new testing approach. This attention brought Morris opportunities to expand her influence. She was appointed to a Department of Justice Advisory Committee on Cold Case Best Practices, consulted with the FBI on revising its evidence retention guidelines, and co-authored a textbook now used in police academies nationwide. Her name became synonymous with the proposition that no case is ever truly unsolvable, only temporarily stalled by the limitations of current methods or resources. Throughout this period of growing recognition, Morris maintained a direct connection to the Simmons case that had started it all. She visited Melissa's grave on the anniversary of finding the Mustang each year, placing fresh flowers and spending a moment in quiet reflection. She kept a small framed copy of Melissa's favorite photograph, the misty morning at Churchill Downs, on her desk as a reminder of the human lives behind the case files. In 2022, Morris received an unexpected call from the Kentucky State Penitentiary. Victor Hargrove, 3 years into his sentence, had been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Given months to live, he had requested a meeting with Detective Morris, a request she was under no obligation to grant. After consultation with the Simmons family, who supported whatever decision she made, Morris agreed to the meeting. On a grey February morning, she sat across from the man whose crimes had defined so much of her career. Hargrove, once imposing in his tailored suits and commanding presence, appeared diminished in his prison uniform, his frame gaunt from illness. "I've followed your work from in here," he began, gesturing vaguely at the prison walls. "The cold case unit, the civilian program, it's all because of her, isn't it?" "Because of what I did." Morris neither confirmed nor denied his assessment, waiting for him to continue. "I've had a lot of time to think," Hargrove said, his voice weaker than she remembered. "About Melissa, about that night, about how one moment of panic destroyed so many lives, hers, her family's, even mine. I told myself for years it was an accident, that I never meant for her to die. But the truth is I valued my reputation more than her life. I made that choice." He paused, struggling with either emotion or physical discomfort. "I can't undo what I did, but I wanted you to know that I understand now. And I'm sorry, not because I got caught, but because I finally see the full weight of what I took from the world." Morris studied him carefully, searching for manipulation in his words, but finding only the reflection of a man confronting his mortality and the sum of his actions. "Why tell me this?" she asked finally. "Why not the Simmons family?" "They deserve peace, not more pain from me," Hargrove replied. "But you never stopped looking for her. You deserve to know your persistence mattered, not just for solving the case, but for what it's become since then. How many other families have answers now because you wouldn't let Melissa be forgotten?" Morris left the prison with complicated feelings. She shared the conversation with Catherine and Robert, who received the news of Hargrove's contrition with quiet acknowledgement, but no particular comfort. His recognition of the harm he had caused changed nothing about their loss. 3 weeks later, Hargrove died in the prison infirmary. The news warranted only a brief mention in the Louisville papers, a footnote to a story the city had largely processed and moved beyond. For Morris, his death represented neither justice nor closure, simply the end of one chapter in a narrative that had expanded far beyond a single case or criminal. That spring brought a milestone Morris had never anticipated when she first opened Melissa's file. The Kentucky legislature passed the Melissa Simmons Cold Case Act, allocating dedicated funding for cold case investigations statewide and establishing standards for evidence preservation and periodic review. The law, championed by legislators who had followed Morris's work, represented institutional recognition that justice delayed need not be justice denied. At the bill's signing ceremony, Governor Rebecca Landry invited Catherine and Robert Simmons to stand alongside her as she put pen to paper. The couple, now in their 60s with streaks of grey in their hair, had transformed their personal tragedy into a legacy of reform that would benefit countless families across the state. This legislation ensures that no case will be forgotten simply because it grows old, the governor declared. No family should wait a decade for answers, as the Simmons family did. With proper resources and modern methods, we can bring light to cases that darkness has too long concealed. After the ceremony, journalists surrounded Morris, asking how it felt to see her work culminate in legislative change. She deflected the attention to the Simmons family, insisting that their advocacy had made the real difference. This wasn't false modesty, but genuine recognition that the greatest catalyst for change had been their refusal to let their daughter become just another unsolved statistic. Later that evening, at a small private dinner with the Simmons family and key supporters of the legislation, Morris allowed herself a rare moment of reflection on the journey that had brought them all together. "When I first saw Melissa's file, I never imagined where it would lead," she admitted. "I just knew I couldn't let it sit there gathering dust while her family wondered and waited. Every cold case deserves that same commitment, not because they're all solvable, but because each one represents people whose lives paused the day their questions went unanswered." Catherine reached across the table to squeeze Morris's hand. "You gave us back our ability to move forward," she said softly. "Not by erasing what happened, but by ensuring it meant something beyond our personal loss." As the evening concluded, Robert Simmons presented Morris with a gift, a leather-bound portfolio containing prints of Melissa's photography, including images never before published. Among them was a photograph Melissa had taken the morning of the day she disappeared, sunrise at Churchill Downs. The iconic twin spires silhouetted against a sky painted in shades of promise. A solitary rider exercising a horse on the misty track. She captioned this one, "Every race has a finish line," Robert explained, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought you should have it." Morris returned to her office late that night, placing the photograph on her desk beside the case files, waiting for her attention. In the stillness, she studied Melissa's image, the perfect composition, the play of light and shadow, the sense of anticipation captured in a single frame. So much talent, so much potential, cut short by one man's desperate attempt to preserve his reputation. Yet from that tragedy had emerged something neither Hargrove nor anyone else could have predicted. A revolution in how justice approached its most challenging cases. Morris thought of the families who now had answers because of methods pioneered in Melissa's case, of rural officers equipped with training they would once have never received, of civilians contributing their expertise to investigations previously shrouded in professional mystery. The photograph seemed to speak across the years, not of endings, but of beginnings, of darkness giving way to light, of races yet to be run, and finish lines yet to be crossed. Morris opened the next file on her desk, a case from 1976 recently flagged by the Civilian Review Team for potential DNA analysis using techniques that hadn't existed even a year ago. This was Melissa's legacy, not just her own justice after a decade of waiting, but a transformation in how society approached its unsolved mysteries. Justice, like the sun in her photograph, could rise even after the longest night. As Louisville awakened the next morning, few of its citizens would connect their daily lives to the quiet revolution that had begun with one missing girl and a detective who refused to forget. But in police departments across Kentucky, in evidence rooms where preserved samples awaited new analysis, in community centers where civilian volunteers reviewed dormant files with fresh eyes, Melissa's story continued to unfold, a reminder that even cold cases carried the warmth of possibility, awaiting only the persistent heart willing to seek their truth. The Derby City had indeed crossed a finish line, but in doing so, had started a new race altogether, one where justice knew no expiration date, where technological advancement constantly redefined what was possible, and where the passage of time no longer guaranteed impunity. In this new reality, shaped by one detective's refusal to surrender and one family's determination to create meaning from loss, cold cases weren't endings but beginnings, stories interrupted but not concluded, waiting for the right moment to reveal their secrets. As the sun rose over Louisville, painting the Ohio River in shades of gold and promise, Zandra Morris opened another file, studied another face, and began again the patient work of bringing light to darkness, a legacy worthy of the young photographer whose own quest for truth had ultimately changed how an entire justice system viewed its unfinished business. In police academies across America, instructors now share the Melissa Simmons case as a textbook example of modern cold case methodology. They point to the integration of advancing technology, the preservation of evidence that seemed insignificant at the time, the value of periodic review with fresh perspectives, and the power of community engagement in solving long-dormant cases. But beyond these technical lessons, they emphasize the human element that drove the investigation forward. One detective's refusal to accept that time diminished the importance of finding truth, one family's transformation of grief into advocacy, and one community's eventual recognition that justice delayed is still justice worth pursuing. In the end, the story that began with a missing girl and her cherry-red Mustang became something much larger, a testament to the proposition that no voice is ever truly silenced as long as someone remains willing to listen. No case is ever truly cold as long as someone continues to care. And no finish line is ever truly unreachable as long as someone refuses to stop running toward it. The Derby City had learned that even the longest races eventually end. And when they do, the victory belongs not just to those who cross the finish line, but to all who kept faith during the long journey toward truth. 10 years after Victor Hargrove's conviction, Louisville hosted the National Cold Case Conference, an event that would never have existed without Melissa Simmons and Detective Zandra Morris. The symbolism wasn't lost on attendees. A city, once defined by a high-profile unsolved case, had transformed into a beacon of hope for investigators nationwide. In the grand ballroom of the Louisville Marriott, more than 500 cold case detectives, forensic specialists, prosecutors, and civilian volunteers gathered to share methodologies that had breathed new life into seemingly hopeless investigations. Morris, now the commissioner of the Kentucky State Police, delivered the keynote address. Though her hair had silvered and lines creased her face, her intensity remained unchanged as she addressed the crowded room. "A decade ago, we stood at a crossroads in criminal justice," she began. "Technology was advancing rapidly, but our systems for applying these innovations to dormant cases lagged behind. The Melissa Simmons Act changed that equation, not just in Kentucky, but across the country as similar legislation took root. Today, we gather to share what we've learned, that time is no longer the ally of those who would escape justice. The conference represented the culmination of changes that had rippled outward from Louisville since Melissa's case was solved. 28 states had enacted legislation modeled after Kentucky's pioneering law, establishing dedicated funding for cold case units and mandating periodic review of unsolved crimes. The FBI had overhauled its evidence preservation protocols, emphasizing the retention of materials that might benefit from future technological advancements. Police academies nationwide now included cold case methodology in their core curriculum. Among the attendees was Ashley Norton, a 32-year-old woman whose striking resemblance to Melissa Simmons was no coincidence. As Catherine and Robert's adopted daughter, Ashley had come into their lives 3 years after Hargrove's conviction, a teenager in foster care with a passion for photography that reminded them painfully of their lost daughter. What began as mentorship through the Melissa Simmons Foundation evolved into a deeper connection. By the time Ashley turned 18, the Simmons had legally adopted her, giving her the family stability she'd never known and themselves a second chance at parenthood. Now a successful photojournalist, with credits in National Geographic and the New York Times, Ashley had followed in Melissa's footsteps while forging her own distinct path. Ashley's conference presentation, The Human Side of Cold Cases, offered a perspective rarely heard in law enforcement gatherings, that of families waiting for answers. She shared the stage with other relatives of cold case victims and survivors, creating a panel that humanized the statistics investigators discussed in their technical sessions. Numbers and methodologies are essential, Ashley told the audience, her voice steady as she displayed a series of portraits she'd taken of families still waiting for resolution. But behind every case number is a family suspended in grief. When you reopen a file that's gathered dust for years, you're not just solving a puzzle, you're potentially releasing people from purgatory. Her words resonated deeply in a room where many had dedicated their careers to exactly that purpose. The thunderous applause that followed her presentation affirmed that the human dimension of cold case work, so often overshadowed by technical discussions of DNA extraction and digital enhancement, remained its emotional core. Catherine and Robert Simmons attended the conference not as speakers, but as honored guests, their presence a living reminder of why the work mattered. Now in their 70s, they had gradually stepped back from the Foundation's daily operations, entrusting its management to a board that included Ashley and Sandra Morris. But their influence remained evident in every initiative the Foundation undertook. During the conference's second day, Catherine found herself drawn to a session on emerging technologies in genetic genealogy. As she settled into a seat near the back, a young detective from Arizona recognized her and approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Simmons, I'm Detective Laura Vega from Phoenix PD. I just wanted to say your daughter's case is why I specialize in cold cases now. The way Detective Morris never gave up on finding answers for your family. It showed me what this work is supposed to look like." Catherine smiled, touching the young woman's hand. "Then Melissa's legacy lives through your work too." This interaction, multiplied across the conference, illustrated how thoroughly the Simmons case had permeated the consciousness of an entire professional community. What began as one family's tragedy had evolved into a movement, reshaping how justice approached its most challenging cases. The conference culminated in an awards ceremony recognizing exceptional achievement in cold case resolution. The highest honor, the Melissa Simmons Award for Investigative Excellence, went to a team from rural Minnesota who had solved a 1982 murder using forensic techniques that hadn't existed when Morris first reopened Melissa's case. As the Minnesota investigators accepted their award, they acknowledged their debt to Morris's pioneering work. "We stand on the shoulders of those who refuse to accept that some cases are unsolvable," the lead detective said. "The methods developed in Louisville showed us that persistence, combined with evolving technology, can pierce the veil of decades." The significance of this moment, a case from a small Minnesota town solved using methodologies that traced their lineage directly back to Melissa's investigation, wasn't lost on anyone in the room. It represented the fulfillment of what Morris had envisioned when she first established the cold case unit, a ripple effect that would extend far beyond Louisville's boundaries. Following the conference, Morris invited the Simmons family, Catherine, Robert, and Ashley, to a private dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Ohio River. They were joined by James Reeves, the patrol officer who had taken the initial missing persons report in 2009, now serving as Morris's deputy commissioner, and Daniel Chang, the forensic technician whose meticulous work had recovered Hargrove's fingerprint from the Mustang. As they dined, conversation flowed easily between people connected by a case that had defined each of their lives in different ways. They shared memories not just of the investigation, but of the changes it had inspired, the legislation, the foundation, the transformed approaches to evidence preservation and technological application. I never imagined, when I was taking that first report, where it would all lead, Reeves admitted, swirling his glass of bourbon. I thought it was just another missing person case, maybe a runaway or an accident. None of us could have predicted this, Catherine agreed. The first years after Melissa disappeared, all we wanted was answers. We never thought about changing systems or inspiring other investigations. Morris nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's how real change happens, I think. Not from grand plans, but from the refusal to accept what seems unchangeable. We just kept asking questions that needed answers, and eventually, those questions led us to re-examine everything about how we approach these cases. Ashley, who had been quietly photographing the gathering, her camera never far from reach, much like Melissa's had been, lowered her lens and offered a perspective unique to someone who had both observed and lived within the story's aftermath. What strikes me looking at all of you is how ordinary and extraordinary this is simultaneously, she said. You're just people who did your jobs with exceptional care. Not superheroes or geniuses, but professionals who refused to take the easy path of forgetting. And that changed everything, not just for one case, but for hundreds. Robert, who had remained characteristically quiet throughout much of the dinner, finally spoke. I've been thinking about Victor Hargrove, he said, surprising everyone at the table. In the years since Hargrove's death, the Simmons rarely mentioned him, preferring to focus on Melissa's legacy rather than her killer. For a decade, he believed time had erased his crime, Robert continued, that the world had moved on and forgotten. I wonder what he would think, seeing this conference, all these cases being solved years or decades later, knowing that time is no longer the ally of those who would escape justice. The table fell silent, contemplating the truth in Robert's words. Hargrove had gambled on the passage of time, obscuring his actions, never imagining that technological advancement would eventually pierce the veil he had constructed. His miscalculation represented that of countless others who believed their secrets were safe simply because they had remained hidden for years. I think that's the most powerful message of all this, Morris said finally. Not just for investigators, but for those who might contemplate similar crimes, that justice may be delayed, but increasingly it cannot be outrun. The methods that didn't exist when Melissa disappeared ultimately revealed what happened to her. The methods that don't exist today will someday answer questions we can't yet resolve. As the evening concluded, they stepped onto the restaurant's balcony, looking out over the city lights reflected in the river. Louisville had changed dramatically in the decade since Melissa's case was solved. New buildings rising, old neighborhoods revitalized, the skyline evolving like the justice system that operated within it. Sometimes I wonder what Melissa would think of all this, Catherine said softly. Her story touching so many lives, changing how we approach these cases, inspiring people she never met. Ashley slipped her arm around her adoptive mother's shoulders. I think she'd be amazed and proud, not just of how her case changed things, but of how you transformed your grief into purpose. The next morning, As conference attendees prepared to return to their jurisdictions across the country, Morris held a final press conference on the steps of the Louisville Metro Police headquarters. Flanked by Catherine, Robert, and Ashley, she announced the expansion of the Persistent Justice Initiative into a national network that would facilitate resource sharing among cold case units nationwide. The work begun in Louisville will now extend to every corner of the country, Morris told the assembled reporters. No department, however small or resource-limited, should face these challenging cases alone. The network we're launching today will ensure that expertise, technology, and support are available to any investigator committed to bringing resolution to long-dormant cases. As the press conference concluded and cameras stopped rolling, a young reporter approached Catherine with a question that caught her off guard. After everything that's happened, the case being solved, the legislation, the foundation, this conference, do you feel that justice was truly served for Melissa? Catherine considered the question carefully before responding. Justice is a complex word, she said finally. If you're asking whether Victor Hargrove's conviction and imprisonment balanced the scales against Melissa's death, the answer is no. Nothing could do that. But if you're asking whether meaning and purpose emerged from our loss, whether Melissa's life continues to matter in ways that transcend what happened to her, then yes, I believe justice has been served in the deepest sense. The reporter nodded, visibly moved by Catherine's response. Thank you for your honesty, she said. It's given me perspective on how to cover these cases with more humanity. This exchange, seemingly minor amidst the conference's larger events, encapsulated another dimension of the Simmons legacy, a transformed media approach to cold cases. Where coverage once focused primarily on the sensational aspects of unsolved crimes, many journalists now emphasize the human impact of delayed justice and the evolving methodologies bringing resolution to families. As the conference concluded, and participants dispersed across the country, they carried with them not just technical knowledge, but a philosophical approach embodied in what had become known as the Louisville model. The proposition that time, once the greatest obstacle to solving cold cases, could be transformed into an ally through persistence, technological application, and community engagement. In the months following the conference, reports began filtering back to Louisville of cases reopened and resolved, using approaches directly inspired by discussions held there. A 1976 murder in Oregon, solved through genetic genealogy techniques shared during a breakout session. A 1991 disappearance in Florida resolved after civilian volunteers identified an overlooked connection mentioned in a panel discussion. A 2003 assault case in Michigan cleared when investigators applied digital enhancement methods demonstrated at a technical workshop. Each success represented another branch of the tree that had grown from the seed planted when Sandra Morris refused to let Melissa Simmons's file gather dust on her desk. Each family receiving long-awaited answers became part of an expanding community, connected by the transformation of grief into purpose, uncertainty into resolution. On the 15th anniversary of finding Melissa's car, the breakthrough that had ultimately led to solving her case, the Simmons Foundation dedicated a memorial garden outside the Kentucky Center for Justice. At its center stood a bronze sculpture depicting a camera capturing light, a symbol of Melissa's passion and the illumination her case had brought to so many others. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds, including investigators whose cases had been resolved through methodologies tracing their lineage to the Simmons investigation. They came not merely to commemorate a solved case, but to celebrate a revolution in how justice approached its unfinished business. As Catherine stood before the gathered crowd, her white hair catching the spring sunlight, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. 15 years ago, when Melissa's car emerged from the water, we thought we had reached the end of our search, she said. We could not have imagined it was actually a beginning, the first step in a transformation that would bring answers to so many other families waiting in the same darkness we had known. She gestured to the sculpture, its metal surface gleaming. This memorial honors not just Melissa, but all those who refuse to let time erase the questions that deserve answers. The investigators who keep searching, the families who keep hoping, the communities that keep caring long after headlines fade. As the ceremony concluded, Sandra Morris found herself approached by a young officer recently assigned to the cold case unit. The woman, barely 30, had been a child when Melissa disappeared, but had grown up in Louisville, absorbing the story that had shaped her community. "Commissioner," she said, "I joined the department because of Melissa's case. I remember my parents following the news when they found her car, and again when Hargrove was convicted. It showed me that persistence matters, that just because something seems impossible doesn't mean it is." Morris smiled, recognizing in the young officer the same determination that had driven her own refusal to let Melissa's file grow cold. "That's the most important lesson any investigator can learn," she replied. "Cases aren't solved by accepting limitations, but by constantly questioning them." As the crowds dispersed and the memorial garden quieted, Catherine, Robert, and Ashley lingered, taking a private moment before the sculpture that represented so much more than bronze and metal. Ashley captured photographs of the changing light on its surface, her camera clicking softly in the late afternoon stillness. "I was thinking about what that reporter asked you," Ashley said to Catherine, "about whether justice was truly served." "Your answer has stayed with me." Catherine nodded, her eyes on the sculpture. True justice would have been Melissa living her full life, graduating, building her career, perhaps having a family of her own. Nothing can restore what was taken, but in creating meaning from loss, in ensuring her story continues to matter in ways that help others, there's a form of justice in that. Not perfect, not complete, but real nonetheless. Robert, who had maintained his characteristic reserve throughout the day's events, finally spoke. "I think about all the cases solved because of what started here. All the families who received answers because Louisville refused to forget one missing girl. If that isn't justice working its way through the world, I don't know what is." As twilight descended on the garden, casting long shadows from the sculpture across newly planted flowers, the 3 generations of the Simmons family, Catherine and Robert, who had lost a daughter, Ashley, who had found parents, and the memory of Melissa, who connected them all, stood together in the gathering darkness, their silhouettes merging with the bronze camera forever capturing light. In police departments across America, investigators prepared to apply lessons learned in Louisville to their own dormant cases. In laboratories, technicians utilized methodologies pioneered during Melissa's investigation to extract evidence from decades-old samples. In community centers, civilian volunteers reviewed case files with fresh eyes, bringing diverse perspectives to investigations once considered closed. This was Melissa's true legacy, not just her own justice, delayed but ultimately delivered, but a transformation in how society approached its unfinished business. She'd gone to Churchill Downs that rainy April night in 2009 to capture images of beauty and competition, never imagining that her own story would one day inspire a different kind of race, one where persistence, technological advancement, and community engagement combined to ensure that even the coldest cases could cross their finish line. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.